Hello, it's Pete Bailey from Vox Coaching, and this video looks at our mindset in an interview. In my experience, we tend to become very conservative versions of ourselves in an interview because it's often very formal and it feels like a test, and so the temptation is to try and avoid getting things wrong. And this tends to breed a caution and reluctance, when in fact what serves us well and what the interview panel wants is they want to see who we are. And they want us to be able to be open enough and bold enough to disclose and show who we are, and so that we can see your best self, someone who's relatively relaxed and open, rather than someone who is quite tense and reduced and very cautious, and who the panel have to kind of prize answers out of. So this isn't only about feeling comfortable in interview and feeling confident in interview, but it's particularly about the whole mindset with which we approach the interview. And I'd say there's a fundamental idea about our objectives, about what we want to achieve. And as with SMART objectives, the key to this is that we express them positively. Rather than I want to avoid ums and ers, I'll replace ums and ers with silences. Or I'll think silently before answering a question. So I've expressed the same wish positively. So rather than I must avoid going too fast, I'm going to take my time. That may sound like a pedantic distinction, but the danger is if our objectives are expressed negatively, we go into an interview seeing all sorts of traps and problems and things we've done wrong, and our inner critic, the voice in our head that is monitoring us, becomes very active. And we see, oh, I've done that wrong or that wrong, I must avoid doing that, I must censor myself and reduce myself. Rather than think, oh, I'm aiming for that, oh, I missed it, I'm aiming for that. It gives us a clear direction. So just notice for yourself when you're expressing your objectives negatively, and ensure that you're expressing them positively. So over the years, I've developed two lists. Lists of things that feel bold in an interview and things where we're trying to make it safe. And I think very often in dangerous situations, of course, naturally, we want to try and make it safe. But that doesn't necessarily serve us well, and that doesn't necessarily show us off at our best. So we're going to chat through some of the symptoms of trying to make it safe and being bold. And just notice, can you switch your mindset around to allow yourself or give yourself permission to be a bit bolder, a bit more open? Paradoxically, it actually feels much more comfortable. It gives us really a relationship to have with the panel. So on the, if you like, the list of trying to make it safe are things like trying to avoid getting it wrong, talking only about our content. If we're in an academic interview, focusing on the science or the academic content of the bid, talking about the past, a kind of false humility where we're avoiding arrogance, and also slipping into generalizations and a lot of detail rather than vision. On the bold side, which feels courageous and feels dangerous, perhaps, but actually gives us confidence and flow, I would say, are the opposites of those. Regarding everything as an opportunity or a springboard, offering and disclosing of ourselves, looking at the personal, or being able to talk personally and to tell stories rather than deliver lists. Talking about the management of a bid, the administration or the leadership of a bid, and rather than just only the content. Being prepared to sell, which sounds like a mercantile thing, but actually being passionate allowing ourselves to be passionate and to care about it, show that we're really interested. Concrete examples and vision. So let's look at these. The fundamental position I think we tend to adopt when we're in pressurized situations is to try and avoid getting it wrong. And in an interview, particularly because they can feel rather formal and unfamiliar, we think, oh, there's a set of rules here and I'm not quite sure how to follow them. And we become a reduced version of ourselves because we're trying to avoid getting it wrong. And so in terms of our answers, that can mean that we just give name, rank and serial number. I don't want to say anything that might be misinterpreted or might be wrong. We censor ourselves. The opposite of that is to offer, to treat every question as a springboard, as an opportunity, as a chance to talk about ourselves and what we do with a bit of passion. That's what the panel wants. These questions are opportunities for you to offer, to show how you think and to show who you are. We tend to focus very strongly on the content, and we also tend in our rehearsal to focus very strongly on the content because that feels very tangible. It feels like, well, that's something we can do. I'm not quite sure how to work on or rehearse the other stuff. How I come across, how I deliver things. To be willing to talk not only about the content of a bid or a role, but also about yourself. Because that is really what an interview is good for, is for showing who you are as a person. We've got who you are on paper, but we want to see, does it match? Who are you really? And so for us, rather than you hiding that, to actually be able to talk about yourself. Now that might be quite uncomfortable to do, especially to talk positively about yourself. So it needs a bit of practice. And I'd suggest practicing in low-risk situations before the interview until you convince yourself. So you can say personal stories, positive things about yourself without feeling embarrassed or censoring yourself. Especially in academia, we feel that perhaps people are funding a bid rather than the person who's leading the bid. And of course, probably when we've got to interview stage, the panel has already made their decision about the qualities of the bid. It's passed a number of hurdles. And the interview is not a good place to interrogate the detail of a bid. You simply don't have time. And whilst the people on the panel tend to be experts, they're not necessarily experts in your specific area. That's the area, that's why we have referees who are real subject matter experts who can analyse the bid in advance and provide comments and perhaps scores. So in the interview, it's not the place to interrogate the detail of the bid. And so the interview is a good place to talk about the management of the bid, the administration of the bid, the leadership of the bid, or the organisation. And that's often the stuff that perhaps as academics we're least interested in. But of course, the panel are potentially giving you a lot of money or a job. And we want to know that you care about this stuff rather than you just want to be in the lab doing your research and, oh, well, the admin will deal with itself. We'll pick it up. We'll pick up your attitude to this material. And very often, fellowship and grant interviews for academics are actually focused much more on the bid, the administration, the management and the leadership of the bid and how the team will do that than on the content of the science itself. So be prepared to talk about that and rehearse being able to talk about it. And talk about it positively, rather than just as a, oh, this is something I've got to do. The panel will pick up on that. We tend to prefer to talk about the past rather than the future. And this is understandable in academia. The priorities of academics and journalists are famously really at odds. Before making any claim, an academic will want to do 8 years research and then perhaps say, well, we can see potentially a tendency towards this with the caveat that this, and in certain circumstances and taking into context, we can see that there's a possibility that blah, 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 blah. Whereas the journalist wants to know, okay, is it going to cure cancer and when? Is it tomorrow? Now, they're operating for different audiences and in different contexts. And we're not at all saying you should dumb down what you do. And so it feels like making claims about the future for academics is very, very risky and also is bad academic practice. Now, of course, it's useful to talk about the past. It's very concrete. But this bid, or this job, will take place in the future. And there is a danger going into an interview that we say, especially for a promotion, for example, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, so I deserve this job. That's all about the past. Whereas the bid, or the job that you've got envisaged, is in the future. And we want to see that you've thought about it and that you're going to, when you get that job or that bid, you're going to open the door the first day you get to work and you've already thought, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'd like to do this. We want to see that you've actively imagined it and that you've got ideas that you'd like to put in place rather than a tick box exercise. And so this means that not only talking exclusively about the past, but being prepared to make claims about the future, and quite bold claims about the future as well. We want to see vision. That's the difference, I'd say, between management and leadership, is that management is about how to enact a vision, how to get to a certain place, whereas leadership is we want to go there. Not so much about exactly the how we get there. And so that vision is about the future. So, how do we give ourselves permission to make claims about the future whilst not feeling inauthentic and, importantly, not bragging or making false claims? What actors do is they suppose, and this idea of supposing is really key. If I say, I am Hamlet, well, I'm not Hamlet, am I? But I'm not lying. What I'm doing is pretending or supposing. The difference between an actor and a con man is that the audience knows with the actor that I'm not really Hamlet, I'm just pretending I was a Danish prince. Whereas with the con man, they don't know that, they're trying to deceive the audience. So you're not trying to deceive your audience here, but you're saying supposing. Just as an actor would say, supposing I was a Danish prince and my uncle had killed my dad and then married my mum and my dad had come back as a ghost and wanted me to revenge him, how would I feel? Supposing. In an interview, you can say to yourself, no one knows what will happen in the future, but supposing it all goes well, supposing it would all go brilliantly, then we could expect X, Y, Z. And that way the panel, they can't come back to you 2 years later and say, but you said this. No, you're saying supposing. Supposing it all goes well, then we can reasonably expect this, 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 and this. And so we're answering in that context. And I think it's useful to approach an interview with that in mind, that that's the convention of an interview, is that we're saying supposing. Suppose it all went well. Now, related to this, we tend to have a false humility. Dare I say it, often the British can be very guilty of this, in that we fear, quite reasonably, coming across as arrogant. But the danger is that we go 100 miles in the opposite direction and we censor any claims about ourselves, particularly personally, We focus only on the detail of the bid. And of course, in an interview, we want to get excited about what might happen. It sounds a very mercantile thing, doesn't it, to sell? And it's perhaps has some of the compromises associated with that. But if you aren't excited and passionate about this bid, and you can't sell it, no one will. And it's a function of your leadership that you are prepared to sell this to industrial collaborators or partners or the team that you work with or the people you want to employ or engage or the postgrad students or the research assistant that you want to work on this. You've got to be able to sell this project to them because they've got to want to work on this bid. They've also got to want to work for you. And why would anyone want to work with you if you're not passionate about this stuff? Now, passion doesn't have to be large scale, and selling doesn't have to be overinflated. But again, I think it's really useful for us to rehearse how to do this, particularly to rehearse positive things we say about ourselves and bold statements about the bid until we feel comfortable saying them rather. Examples and not generalizations. This is the key thing that pretty much every mock interview I've attended, the panel have said to the candidate afterwards, we want more examples, more concrete examples. That is what human beings are hotwired to remember. So instead of, I'm widely published in top journals, I've got 2 papers in Nature, 1 in Science, and 1 in Caravans Weekly, or whatever it is. So that you've got a concrete example of things rather than a generalization. Vision rather than the detail of organization. So, this switch in mindset is not something that's only about our intellectual understanding, and it requires a bit of courage, and it also requires, I'd say, a bit of rehearsal beforehand. But that switch in mindset will paradoxically make it much, much more comfortable in the interview, because rather than stepping back and being frightened of joining in, you're taking part, and naturally your content will start to flow because you're giving yourself permission rather than censoring yourself. So just to summarise, we've looked at a twin list of what is safe on the one hand and what is bold on the other, and we've thought about rethinking our mindset for interviews, about phrasing all our objectives positively. Rather than trying to avoid getting it wrong and censoring ourselves, we're giving ourselves permission so that we're not a conservative version of ourselves. Rather than treating it as a test, every question is an opportunity or a springboard to offer and disclose, rather than talking only about the content of the bid or the absolute facts of the job or the science. Instead, we're prepared to talk about ourselves, to talk positively about ourselves. We're also prepared to talk about the management or the administration or the leadership of the bid, not only the content. Not only to focus on the past, but be willing to talk positively and boldly about the future. And in a related way, rather than to have a false humility, to be able to prepare to sell the bid and ourselves. To give ourselves permission to sell the bid, I would say that rather than think of selling ourselves, or rather than think of doing this for my career, or for the organisation, or for the university, instead, I'd like you to think of all the people who would benefit if this bid or this job went ahead, or this pitch, and to do it on behalf of them. So that way, you're not selling this on behalf of yourself. You're thinking of all the people who would benefit if you did this job or this bid as brilliantly as you will. And that you're coming in and you're doing it on their behalf. And that gives you permission to sell this with passion and without arrogance. Arrogance is when it's about ourselves. I'm bigging myself up. I'd say a genuine authority is when we're doing this on behalf of everyone. We're offering our services on behalf of the common good, if you like. Examples are not generalisations, and vision. So, enjoy your interview. It's Pete Bailey from Vox Coaching. Thank you very much.